Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to continue the Porsche build and finish up bag A. So here we go, step 8, the rear suspension tower. We need two 3x10 step screws, two 5mm ball ends, four 4mm washers, two M3 nuts, two D8 upper arms and the fibre shock tower. First we'll mount up the ball ends in the outer holes just below the square holes. We need to use a little bit of thread lock so the nuts won't come loose. Now I'm going to use some liquid thread lock rather than the gel from the kit. It's a bit easier to manage and keep everything looking nice and clean. We just need a little bit on the threads, then we can soak up the excess, leaving a tiny amount left in the threads. Then the nut goes on and we use two wrenches to nip it up. For the upper arms we need to grease up the step on the step screw just with a little smear. Then we pop it through one of the lower outer holes, followed by two washers, and we thread it into the end of the arm with the small step. It's a fine thread going into plastic, so be careful not to over tighten it. But even when the step screw is bottomed out, there's a lot of wobble. We'll wait and see how it looks once the rest of the suspension's fitted before we do anything about it though. The other arm is of course exactly the same, so with that done, that's step 8 complete. Step 9, mounting the tower and the cups. We need two 3x12 self-tappers, two M3 washers, two black O-rings, the fibre spacer plate, and two rear drive cups, one with a pin and one without. First we'll install the O-rings into the cups. They need to be seated all the way down at the bottom and not tipped up, or the drive shaft won't fit in a couple of steps. You can use some tweezers, but using one of the dog bone ends of a drive shaft can make it nice and simple. Usually a combination of both gets the job done. Next, to fit the cups we need to grease up the shaft and the splines using the ball diff grease. It's important that we don't use the regular grease and contaminate the diff. If regular grease gets in there, it's going to start slipping in no time. Once lubed up, we can pop a cup in each side and wiggle them back and forth until they fully drop into place. For the tower, we need to sandwich the spacer between the tower and the gearbox. Trying to hold all the bits together is going to be a bit of a pain, so we'll start by threading one of the screws with a washer under its head, just a turn or so, just enough to grab. Then we can slot the spacer in and nip up the screw, then loosen it a little so the spacer can float. Then we can line up and thread in the second screw, nip them both up, and that's the tower fitted. Step 10, CV joints and lower arms. We need two 32mm screw pins, two 3x2.5 grub screws, two 1150 bearings, two 2x9.8mm pins, two joints, two rear axles and two rear drive shafts. For plastic we have two D11 lower arms and a C11 and a C12 the rear uprights. Remember they're sided, so keep track of which is which. We'll also need some thread lock, the anti-wear grease and a cocktail stick. The two CV joints are exactly the same, so we'll just build up one on camera. They're quite straightforward to assemble, if a little bit fiddly. First we need to thinly coat the round end of the drive shaft with some AW grease, making sure to get some in the slots and round the inside. You don't need to go mad, just a very thin coat all over will do the trick. Then the joint slides into the large hole so the ends are nice and flush. Then we spin the joint so the hole for the pin is at 90 degrees to the shaft so we can get the pin in. Next we pop the joint into the axle, lightly grease up the end of the pin and slide it through the axle, through the joint and out the other side. Again, so it's nice and flush. So we don't get the AW grease everywhere, it's also a good idea to wipe off any excess. It does have a tendency to stick to absolutely everything. To lock the pin in, we need to thread the grub screw into the threaded side of the joint. It's a bit of a toss-up whether to add the grub first or do it last like I am here. Either way, the grub needs some thread lock before going in. The important bit is we don't want to get any thread lock in the moving parts. With this design there's just enough space to get the grub in with the joint at full flex. Make sure it's tight, assemble the second shaft and they're ready to fit. The uprights get attached to the arms next. We just slot the upright in, press in a pin and thread it into the arm. The pin doesn't need to be super tight, just bottomed out. Usually when people complain that the pins fall out from the Tamiya models, it's because they've been over tightened and the threads have lost their bite. The last step is to slide a bearing onto each axle and press them into the uprights. Nice and simple, so we've got 2 assemblies ready to fit. Step 11, fitting the arms. We need 2 3x14 step screws, 2 3mm washers and 2 46mm screw pins. This should be really easy. We just offer one of the arms up to the appropriate side, push in a pin and screw it in. But the arms really didn't want to line up with the holes in the gearbox. So I had a good look and quickly discovered I have the diff cover upside down. The side with the bits that cover the screws should be at the top, a byproduct of building late at night. In my defence, the cover does fit absolutely perfectly the wrong way up. Everything lines up, at least up to this part of the build. It's not a problem though, we just take the screws out, flip it round and put the screws back in. And there we go, like it was meant to be. Now we can offer the arms up again and this time push the pins in and nip them up. Then we can pop the axle back in, add a little AW grease to the cup and insert the dog bone. For the top arm, we slide in a screw pin through the end hole on the top arm, add a washer, and then thread it into the top of the upright. Rinse and repeat with the other side, and that's the rear suspension done. Except I'm really still not happy with how wobbly the inner step screws are on the fiberglass suspension tower. The uprights have some major movement in them, and with all the movement that's going on, there's going to be a fair bit of wear and tear. The fix I think is fairly straightforward though. The kit comes with 2 extra 4mm washers. If we add one to each stack, we can take out the slop. Unfortunately, they are just a little bit tight, so we can't tighten the screw fully, but a little bit of plastic safe thread lock would sort that out. Ideally, we should make some custom upper arms with ball joints, maybe based on the RC 4-wheel drive angled ones. The problem is the inner end has a 4mm hole, which is too big for an M3 screw, so we need to do something clever to take up the difference. There might be some small spacers available that would be pretty much a straight drop-in. Either way, I'm happy enough with this setup. It still looks stock, which is fairly important, I think, with a special edition or limited production kit. Right then, well, that's it for this week. I hope you didn't mind seeing the plaster on my little finger falling off here and there. I only noticed it when I was editing the video, so sorry for subjecting you to that horror. Right, as always then, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!